Hello learners, welcome to this platform again. Remote Julius is my name, taking you through social studies. Now, previously we have been looking at the topic of the people of Africa, and we have gone through it bit first, and the part which I want to emphasize here is the reasons for the migration of the ethnic groups. Now, the reasons cut across. There is only one which I need to emphasize here. Reasons why the ethnic groups migrated to areas where they settled. For instance, they ask you, why did the Bantu leave their cradle land of Cameroon Highlands and move to East Africa, for instance? There is this reason of search for fertile land, are looking for areas with reliable rainfall. Then there is a point of looking for areas with pasture. Now, look at these 2 points. For the case of the Bantu, you talk of this, because the Bantu were crop farmers, and these people wanted fertile land where they could grow crops. But when it comes to the Nilotics, all the 3 groups, River Lake Nilotes, Plain Nilotes, and then you talk of the what? The Highland, you bring in this point. They were looking for areas with pasture, or they were looking for pasture and water, because for them they were pastoral groups. Now the other reasons will remain the same. External attacks, internal quarrels among themselves, overpopulation. So it cuts across, but the emphasis is these 2. That this one specifically will go to pastoral groups. Then this one will mainly go to the Bantu because these were crop farmers. But the other reasons will cut across and remain the same. So that's about the people or the ethnic groups in Africa. We want to leave that topic and move to our new topic, and that is foreign influence in the African continent. So we are looking at foreign influence as our new topic. Foreign influence in Africa. So that is the new topic we are looking today. Now, we are talking of foreign. Who is a foreigner? So for instance, at home, you may have a foreigner. You may have somebody who has not been living with you and then just joins you abruptly. That one is a foreigner. For the case of Africa, we are looking at those visitors who came from outside the continent of Africa. For instance, those who came from Asia, those who came from Europe. Those are the people we are terming as foreigners. Now, when it comes to the word influence, we are looking at the changes that were brought by these people who came from outside the continent of Africa. That's what we mean. A foreigner, we are looking at people who came from outside the continent of Africa, more especially Asia, that's for the case of the Arabs, then Europe for the case of Europeans. Now, when we bring in the term of changes, so we are looking at that, when we bring in the influence, we are looking at the changes that were brought by these people. So here we shall start with foreign influence. We are talking of the changes. How do we define this foreign influence? We are saying foreign influence refers to changes brought by visitors, we can call them visitors, who came from outside the continent of Africa. So those are the visitors, continent of Africa. Now, what the changes can be political, the changes can be economic, the changes can be social. For instance, when we talk of Christianity, When we talk of Islam, these were social changes, because in Africa we had our own religion, which was the ATR. But there were those new religions that were brought. For instance, when we talk of Islam, that was brought by the Arabs. When you talk of Christianity, that was brought by the Europeans. When we talk of boundaries, dividing of our territories, boundaries, division, that was political. It was a change that was brought by people who came from outside the continent. Now, this is about what changes. Now, we are going to look, but Africa had for so long been called a dark continent. So we are looking at the reasons. Why was Africa known as a dark continent? So, our number 2, we are looking at why Africa was known as a dark continent. Was it because Africa has blacks? That is not true. Because somebody may clear, because when you talk of darkness, because the African people are black, so that's the reason. That's not the actual reason. Now, Africa was known as a dark continent because little was known about the interior. We are looking at the inside part of Africa. People, these visitors did not know exactly what was inside East Africa. So he said, little was known about the interior of Africa. Little was known about the interior. That's the reason why many Europeans, many foreigners called our continent a dark continent. They did not know exactly, because when you look at even the search for the sea route to India, these people would pass through the water bodies. Vasco da Gama did not even enter into the interior of East Africa. He remained at the coast and then he went to India. Even otherwise, it is only until the time of the explorers, when you talk of people like John Speke, who managed to enter into the interior, and then they were able to know what exactly was happening into the interior East Africa. And what brought this, for instance, in East Africa was the search for the source of River Nile. Because they could see River Nile, they could see the mouth of River Nile, they would see River Nile pouring water the Mediterranean Sea, but they did not know exactly where does this river originate. So that search for the source of River Nile made many European groups, especially explorers, to come into the interior to search for its source. And that now they made reports about Africa, and some of the reports that these people made was about the resources, the resource wealth, that Africa is a continent with a lot of resources. And these resources attracted people like the traders, the colonialists, then the white settlers who came later. So, because they did not know much about the interior of Africa, they kept on referring Africa as a dark continent. Now, let's also give reasons. Why did it take long for Africa to be known by the outside? Reasons why it took. Reasons why it took long for Africa to be known. Why did it take long for Europeans to enter into the interior of Africa? First, Africa had hot deserts. For instance, when we talk of the Sahara Desert, it is the hottest desert in the world, and it is also regarded to be the largest desert. So the harsh desert conditions stopped many foreigners from coming into the interior. Secondly, we are talking of the thick, impenetrable forest. Africa had thick, impenetrable forests. Now, this prevented, because there were no proper roads or routes which these people would use to enter into. Now, Africa up to now, when we talk of countries like DRC, we still have a lot of thick forests, and this forest harbor, or this forest keep dangerous wild animals. So this forest prevented from having good roads into the interior. So the presence of thick impenetrable forests also stopped many foreigners from entering into the interior of Africa. Thirdly, we can say Africa had hostile tribes. So the third reason you can say Africa had hostile tribes. Hostile tribes. For instance, when you talk of the Maasai of Kenya, the Nandi. Now, these are people who did not want any foreigner from passing through their land, because they had a fear that these foreigners will take their grazing land. They will stop them, or they will take part of the land that they will use from grazing there. So this hostile tribe, because for instance, in Kenya, they talk of people who were killed, like Peter West. If you remember your P6 work, was one of the whites who was killed by the Maasai. Then they tell us that even during the construction of the Uganda Railway, many foreigners were killed by these hostile tribes. Then when you come to Uganda, you talk of Galt, who was killed in Barara, and I understand his monument is still there. So people did not like these foreigners. So there was also that fear, until we are told that it was Joseph Thompson who managed successfully to go through the Maasai land. But many of the whites were killed because these are hostile tribes. So that also stopped many foreigners from entering into the interior. Then, fourthly, we say Africa had huge mountains that were difficult to cross. Africa had huge mountains. Now, the huge mountains also made transport very difficult, that these people would not go through these huge mountains. So that was also another hindrance. And then lastly, we said Africa had dangerous wild animals. Africa had dangerous wild animals. So this was a problem also. It was also another hindrance from Europeans coming, or any other foreigner from coming into the interior of Africa. So you will see hot deserts, life became very difficult, because mainly in Europe, when you look at Europe, Europe is more of a cold, or you can say a temperate continent. The temperatures are quite low. But now, many of them were used to such temperatures, but coming to Africa, where the deserts were so hot, so they could not go through that. Then also we are talking of the impenetrable forests that made transport very difficult. That also could not allow many foreigners to come into the interior. Then we are talking of the hostile tribes. I've given an example of the Maasai, the Nandi. This also stopped many of the Europeans from coming into the interior. Then the huge mountains made transport difficult for many of these people. And then lastly, we are talking of the dangerous wild animals that will attack these people. Now let's look at the first groups, the first visitors, because we are talking of the visitors who came from outside the continent. Who were these visitors specifically? So the earliest visitors to come to Africa were, first we had the Arabs, and then we had Europeans. So these were the earliest visitors. Now Arabs came first. Arabs came first. And these people came from the continent of Asia. So the first visitors, the first foreign visitors to come to the continent of Africa with the Arabs. And where were these people coming from? Which continent? That was Asia. Then later, the Europeans also came, who were coming from the continent of Europe. So these were the earliest foreigners, the earliest visitors to come into Africa. Now let's look at specifically in Asia, which countries in Asia sent many of the Arabs into Africa. Now we are looking at countries like Saudi Arabia. We are talking of countries like Yemen. We are talking of countries like Persia or Jordan. These are some of the Asian countries that sent most of the Arabs into Africa. Now let's look at the reasons. What were the reasons that made the Arabs to come to Africa? So reasons for the coming of the Arabs. Reasons for the coming of the Arabs. Now, one of the reasons, the major reason, was to carry out trade. These were basically traders. So many of the Arabs who came to Africa were mainly traders. So we say to carry out trade. Carry out trade as one of the major reasons. But there were Arabs that also came to spread Islam. So others came to spread Islam. Spread Islam as a religion. Then thirdly, we had Arabs who were running away from religious wars. You know, during the time of Prophet Muhammad, they would go and conquer an area and spread Islam by force. So, and those wars are called jihads. They are known as the jihads. So, some of the people ran away from these wars. So, you can say others ran away from religious wars. So, mainly three reasons why the Arabs came to Africa. The major one was to carry out trade. Secondly, there are those who came to spread Islam. And then thirdly, there were those Arabs that were running away from the jihads. Jihad is the Islamic war that is aimed at spreading Islam to people. Now, let's see, how did these Arabs come now? What means of transport were used by these Arabs? What means of transport were used by these Arabs? First of all, these Arabs were mainly using water transport as a type. So you talk of water transport as a type. So that's the type of transport that they use. Then we are talking of doors as the means of transport they were using. And we said these doors had no engines. They were being pushed by what we call the monsoon winds. Monsoon winds are seasonal winds. They use the word monsoon to mean seasonal. There was that specific period of time where these winds would blow across the ocean towards Asia. Then there was that time when they would blow up from Asia to the African coast. So they were seasonal. So they were using these doors. These doors were of a disadvantage. At times these people would get lost in deserts. So they used water transport. They used doors as the means of transport. Now let's look at how was then Africa affected by the coming of the Arabs. How was Africa affected by the coming of? So let's put the effects of Arabs into the continent of Africa. Effects of Arabs in the continent of Africa. So one thing we should know, that when the Arabs, we are now looking at the changes that were brought by these people. Remember, we are looking at the influence. What changes were brought by the Arabs? one of the changes you can say that slave trade was introduced to Africa, because originally this was not there. And it says slave trade is the buying and selling of human beings. You can imagine a human being being sold or being bought as a property or as an animal. You can go to the garden, to the market, and you buy a cow or you buy a goat. So they brought this system of slave trade. That was an effect which was negative. That was an influence which was negative. Then also say new items of trade were brought. New items of trade were brought. Now when we talk of items, for instance, when you talk of the carpets, glass, mirrors, guns, so these were items that were brought to Africa. Originally, they were not there. That we can take that as a positive contribution. Then Islam was introduced. You can also take that as a positive contribution to the Africa, or a positive influence. You can take that also as a positive influence. So we talk of Islam was introduced to Africa. That you can take that as a positive what? Influence. Then also, apart from Islam, we are saying the Kiswahili language and culture was introduced. Kiswahili language and culture was introduced. So, how did, for instance, in East Africa, how was Kiswahili brought? We said the intermarriage of the Arabs and the coastal Bantu led to the introduction of the Kiswahili language. So Kiswahili is a mixed language of Arabic and Bantu. That's how Kiswahili language. And we have even a culture where we have the people who are known as the Swahili. The people are called the Swahili. The language is called Kiswahili. That's the difference you should get. The language is Kiswahili, the people are Swahili, or the culture. So that you can take that also as a positive contribution. The new crops, you can talk of new crops, such new crops like cloves, rice, were introduced. Now we talked of cloves is one of the major crops that is grown in the islands of Zanzibar and Pemba. It is their major crop, that's cloves. These cloves were brought during the time of slave trade. Then rice was also introduced. So that was a positive contribution. You see, crop. Now cloves is used to make spices. So at times at home, we have some of the food spices that add a flavor to our foods. So cloves was brought by the Arabs. Then you can also say zebu cows. Zebu cows were introduced. Zebu cows were introduced. Don't confuse the zebu cows with the longhorn cattle. The longhorn cattle were brought by the Bachwezi. Those are the ones commonly known as the Ankole cows. They were brought by them. But the Arabs got what we call the zebu cows. They have short horns. Then the Arabs linked Africa to Asia. Africa was linked to Asia. Africa was linked to Asia. So there was that connection between Africa and Asian countries. That's the link we are talking about. The connection between the two continents. They also talk of cowrie shells as a form of money was brought. Cowrie shells as a form of money was brought to Africa. So those were the changes that were brought to Africa. So to go through this, we are talking about foreign influence, and we say when we talk of foreign influence, we are referring to the changes that were brought by visitors who came from outside the continent of Africa. That's what we mean by foreign influence. Some of these influences were positive, others were negative. Then we say Africa had been called a dark continent for so long. Reason being that little was known, little about the interior, inside, when you talk of interior, inside the continent of Africa was known. Because remember, Africa is a continent that's almost completely surrounded by water. So even in the search for a route to India, these people would go outside, but they took long to enter into the interior. So they kept on calling Africa a dark continent because they didn't know what exactly was in the interior of Africa. Then we said, why did it take long for these people to enter into the interior? We said, one, Africa had hot deserts, like the Sahara Desert. It had harsh climatic conditions. Then Africa had thick, impenetrable forests that made transport very, very difficult. That these are forests where you get trees close to each other and it is very difficult to go through it. And yet, at the same time, these forests keep dangerous wild animals. Africa had hostile tribes. I've given an example of the Maasai in Kenya, who killed many of the foreigners who tried to cross their land. I've given an example of Peter West, who was one of the European explorers who was killed in Kenya by the Maasai. Then we also talked of the huge mountains, talk of the Kilimanjaro, Kenya, Rwenzori. These mountains made transport so difficult for the whites. Then wild animals, of course, we had no game parks. These animals moved from point to point. So in the process, they would what? Eat, kill these foreigners. And we say the earliest foreigners to come were mainly people who came from Europe, who are Europeans, and then people who came from Asia, who were the Arabs. But between the two, Arabs were the first. So when they are asking the first foreigners, these were the Arabs. Later, they were followed by Europeans. Where did these Arabs come from? They came from countries like Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Persia, Jordan. What brought the Arabs into Africa? Many of them came to many of them came to carry out trade. Others came to spread Islam, while there were those who were running away from Islamic wars, which are called the jihads. Then, what means of transport were used by the Arabs to come? They used doors as means. Then water transport was used as a type. Then we are looking at the effects, the influence that were brought by the Arabs as the first group. We are saying first slave trade was introduced as a negative effect because originally we did not have it. Then trade items such as mirrors, guns were brought. Then we are talking of Kiswahili language, which is the language that was formed after the intermarriage of the Arabs and the coastal Bantu. Then we are talking of some of the coastal towns were built, like when you talk of Mogadishu, when you talk of Malindi, these were towns that were built. Zebu cows were introduced, don't confuse Zebu cows with Ankole cows. The longhorn cattle were brought by the Bachwezi. Then you talk Africa was linked to Asia. There was that connection. And then cowrie shells were introduced as a form of money. Thank you for being a good audience. Bye for now. Meet you in the next lesson.